too many elephants.
Hello, and this is Too Many Elephants. Turn the volume down, Sean. Come on, get used to this. It's not hard. It's just like being on the radio, except your face is on the screen. This is Too Many Elephants, and I am Sean McGinty. If there's an elephant in a room, I'll be pointing it out. 22 years on the radio at the BBC, I now help people and businesses to tell their stories better. Sometimes it's journalism, other times it's digital strategies and training. Contact me here on X or surf your way across the interwebs to toomanyelephants.com. Let's get to the right screen. So, over the last few weeks, as I start my independent journey into public service journalism without the licence fee, I've been looking at some of the newly designed dangers on our pavements. London has them, Bristol, Manchester and York, and they might well be coming to a town near you soon. I'm talking about floating bus stops. We're looking at one here on the screen. In essence, it's cyclists, e-bikes and those huge, heavy cargo three-wheelers going at speed in a place where you might not expect to find them. You might expect on a pavement to just find people on foot. Pedestrians. So how do we make life on our pavements safer for everyone? My guest today is perfect for this subject, as you'll find out very soon when I introduce you to him. So a journalist is a storyteller. Some create false narratives to suit their own biases. I firstly like to be aware of my bias if I possibly can be, but I've got a hunger to hear from people who challenge my attitudes to important subjects. It's part of having an inquiring mind, which is something that's been dismally lacking in the heritage media for all the time I've been in it. Let's take a look at political journalism. Today it's much more about the personalities than policies, as we've found writ large in the last couple of weeks. As the USA ushers in its 47th president, were the UK MSN transatlantic political pundits and news anchors talking about the failed policies of the Dems? Were they even looking ahead to figures to try and figure out the extent of policies of the new Trump administration and the effects they would have? No, our mainstream media was chuttering on ad nauseum about Elon Musk's comments about Nigel Farage. If our democracies are to be able to function in any meaningful way at all, then journalism needs to deal with the policy, not the people. As we'll find out in the coming weeks, our pavements in towns and cities are a lot less safer than they were. This is a policy issue, and it makes pavements more dangerous for a whole raft of people who've got legal protection in the public domain when it comes to accessibility. Do you remember when even the smallest of cafes had to put a disabled toilet in? The right thing to do in many ways, but councils were fierce in their commitment to ensure all places that have toilets should have a disabled version. Now, many councils aren't listening to blind and partially sighted people, or disabled people, or parents with young children, or people walking a dog that gets excited when it sees anything on the ground that might be even remotely edible. I just don't expect to find vehicles travelling up to 30 miles an hour on a pavement. I don't think that's an unreasonable position to hold. The last Tory government was, after 14 years of power, about to bring in legislation to tackle dangerous cyclists, but the law was dropped by the Labour government when they came into power. I've been in touch with the Department for Transport and will bring you more on the law next week on Talking to X on Too Many Elephants. But before that, podcasts with testosterone-filled men talking loudly often have some kind of nutritional supplement they recommend. They get money for this, which helps them to fly around the world and have really deep conversations with other men who like to talk loud. But why try and flog supplements to your local Substack TikTok community when probably just eating better and exercising will be the best advice? Yes, I know the answer. It is money. Filthy lucre. They'll read out any old crap for cash. So if you've listened to Chris Williamson and his theories on life, don't buy any of the products he's trying to flog you. If you want more protein in your diet, eat edamame beans. If you want more vitamin D, go outside. And if you crave more vitamin C, then take a leaf out of this young man's book. This is genius. My guest is after this short message.
I have a mandarin in my backpack. It's impossible to fall into a depression. And that's because it's got some nice natural sugar. That means when I eat it like this, I'm happy. I'm energetic. Today there's no sun. This got vitamin C, so I don't need sun when I have this. Plus, it's got a nice color, and it doesn't take any space. It's fresh in your mouth when you wake up. It's just amazing to take a grasp of a mandarin. Wow. Yeah, feels great, man. Feel alive. The mandarin. Mandarins are great, man.
Too many elephants.
Nick Freeman, aka Mr. Loophole, is a well-known celebrity lawyer. He's worked wonders for many wealthy clients who've been stopped by the police behind the wheel of a car. His knowledge of the law with regard to vehicles, the roads and these so-called shared public spaces would make him the perfect guest for me today. Absolute bonus then to be able to introduce to you Nick Freeman, aka Mr. Loophole. Hello.
Hi, Sean. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, good to have you on. So we've got a lot of things to talk about today. Just to contextualise it very briefly, I've been chatting with blind and partially sighted people from the National Federation for the Blind UK about floating bus stops. And then obviously there's a whole load of different issues that sort of come into that, and we'll get to those in a second. But for the very few people who don't know who you are, you're known as Mr. Loophole. You've done a lot of work basically helping people with traffic problems.
Yeah, I'm actually a criminal lawyer. I used to prosecute for the police, then started defending. And the bank robbers used to get drink driving cases, and that's how it started. I used to do those. You got paid privately, not legal aid. And eventually it was supply and demand. And for the last 20 years or so, it's principally road traffic stuff, probably even more than 20 years, to be quite honest with you.
I do know you've got an interesting sort of route into the law and the position you're in now. Could you tell me, how did you get into this business you're in?
What? How did I become a lawyer?
Yeah, I know it's an interesting story. It's a long story, but give me the short version, maybe.
When I was 7, my dad said to me, he asked me, we were coming back from Sunday school, and he said, "What are you going to do when you grow up?" That was obviously on the assumption I was going to grow up, and I said, "I don't know, Dad. What earns the most?" And he said, "Lawyers earn £4,000 a year." This was back in 1964, so it was £4,000 a year, not an hour. So I said, "All right, Dad, I'll be a lawyer." And then I said, what do lawyers do?" And he said, "They argue for a living." And I thought, wow, £4,000 a year, arguing for a living, not getting a clip, sounds perfect. So literally, from that early age, that's what I wanted to do. And I did all my exams and all the rest of it. Law's a massive subject, and I had no idea. So I had visions of me as a big commercial lawyer, big office, etc., etc. I wanted to do something different. I applied for different jobs around the world. I got offered a job in Hong Kong. I was thinking of joining the Hong Kong police. In any case, to cut a long story short, I'd got a job as a commercial lawyer in Hong Kong and another one for a multinational firm in London. And during the end of my articles, a friend of mine who was a lawyer in the firm I was training at, without asking me or telling me, said, he took what he said, "I've entered you for an advocacy competition." And it was £50 first prize. Never done any debating, never done any advocacy. And to be honest, I was pretty disenchanted with the law. I was finding it really boring.
Yeah.
And in case I entered this competition, got through the preliminary rounds, and when you just do something and you just love it, it just. In any case, I actually got into the finals, won my £50, which was a lot of money in those days, and decided to. I got offered a job prosecuting for Greater Manchester Police. So literally, 1981, came up to Manchester, second day in at the deep end, and literally since then, 2 years prosecuting, doing. They throw you in pretty quick. Your learning is very rapid because you're on your own and you get on with it. And then I started defending. Yeah, then I started defending in 1983. Went into partnership a few months later, and we built up a big practice. And to be honest, I love the law, but I hated the politics. And January 1999, I started all over again on my own with my secretary, who threatened to leave me unless I left, and one clerk. And during the first year, I was lucky enough to have Beckham and Sir Alex, not in that order. Sir Alex was first, got results obviously for both of them. I'd done loads of minor celebs, but they were the first two big ones in my first year on my own, and off we went.
That's Well, it's a leap of faith for you at that point. I mean, you know, you're not owed these cases. You've got to sort of get out
Yeah.
there and earn them when you set up on your own. How do you think, was it just literally a fate or luck that you ended up with celebrity cases, or was
No,
it kind of
no,
because of what
no,
you were
no.
doing?
No, definitely not. Look, I think you make your own luck. My last weekend as a prosecutor, I spent in the law library, in the police law library, and I wrote down as many cases, drink driving cases, in longhand that I possibly could, because I realized when I was prosecuting, because I was a little bit cocky, the guy used to send me out in the afternoon to one of the towns around Greater Manchester with 50 files of road traffic because everyone hated it.
Mm,
And I realized then if you knew your stuff, and it was horrible stuff, really Anaraki type stuff, horrible stuff that no one really wanted. If you knew it, you couldn't lose. And certainly in the very early 80s, if you knew the law, the police had an impossible task convicting drink drivers. And so I just buried my head in the law. And, you know, from doing legal aid cases, as I say, I had started off with bank robbers, alleged bank robbers. Some of them were
mm.
bank robbers. And I just won every case. And of course, what happens is they say, right, he's the guy, you got this problem, he's the guy. And you then end up, obviously, with what I call minor celebs. There was in Manchester, Fufu Lamar, well-known drug artist, Happy Mondays, Sean Ryder,
Yeah,
Frank
legends all.
Worthington,
Wow.
lots of sort of getting results, and then eventually you do land the big one. Eventually, the press take notice and they start following you, and they're interested because people think you're driving, you're drunk, or you're driving, you're speeding, or you're driving and you've had a serious accident, you're guilty. Well, obviously, I understand that from a moral perspective, but obviously not from a legal perspective. And the minutiae of the law is a lawyer's armory. And if you know your stuff, you're well equipped to give your client the best possible defense. So I buried my head, and so I don't honestly think it's luck. I'm not being modest or boastful
No,
when I say that. I'm just saying there's an awful lot of hard work that goes into it. For me,
sure.
it's like doing trials is like having exams, and every sleeping moment, every awake moment, you're churning stuff over in your mind all the time, trying to find that angle.
There's a creativity to it in some way, isn't there? Because you have to have a mind that's busy enough to envisage another way of looking at the facts in front
Yeah,
of you.
you've got to think outside the box. So I mean, if I just give you a little illustration, I mean, I had one guy came to see me. I've got hundreds of stories. This guy came to see me, a drink drive, white collar guy, fifth conviction, fifth charge. I looked at the papers as I always do. I said, I can't see anything. You've got no defence here. And he was in breach of a suspended sentence, so he was going to prison. And he got quite arsy with me and said, listen, you're meant to be the hotshot lawyer. You find me a defence. And he was insistent that I went to court to argue his case.
Mm.
And I actually spoke to the Solicitors Regulatory Authority because I was concerned about taking a trial fee off him when I got no defence. Any case, long story short, go to court. Officer gave his evidence impeccably, so I'm now starting to fish. And I said to the officer, I said, when he blew into the machine, what was shown on the VDU? And the officer said, void. I said, oh, please don't think I'm being rude, officer, but how do you spell it? Because I instantly recognized the significance of that word. And he said, VOID. Thank you very much, sat down, waited for the Crown to close the case, then made a submission that the effect of the word void meant that the machine wasn't working, as opposed to voided, ED, which meant that the defendant hadn't provided sufficient quantities of breath. So the prosecution asked for an adjournment to instruct an expert to consider my submission. The expert said, if the VDU had shown the word void, yes, the machine wasn't working, and that was the evidence. So the guy was acquitted. We got costs. He didn't go to prison. I learned that because I was on holiday just reading. No one had a clue. I
Yeah,
wouldn't have had a clue. But it's just having that hunger for something that gives you the edge, and
yeah,
and that's it, isn't it? Look, I'll be honest. I love discussing things, and I love winning. And if I advise someone to fight something, there's a reason behind it. I never give any guarantees. I don't give percentages. I say, look, in my view, this is worth fighting.
yeah.
And if I say that, it is worth fighting. That's it. So you think outside the box. You've got to have faith. And what happens is you often have an argument that you go in with and you come out with a completely different argument. You win the case with an argument that you didn't know was going to raise its head. But if you don't have the knowledge, the points that are raised they don't impact on you. They're insignificant, aren't they? Because you don't understand the benefits. So people, for example, that the word void meant nothing to anybody, but
Yeah.
it did to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not an anorak, to be honest. And a lot of it is studying human language, the way people stand. An officer. I was doing another drink drive in I'm going to say a local magistrate's court for a well-known man's nephew, and the facts were quite straightforward. 3 o'clock in the morning, and the guy allegedly reversed his car on this car park, which was classified as a road. And the facts were, my client said he didn't move the car, he was asleep. And as I was watching the officer give his evidence, he appeared to be chewing. And so I thought, well, that's discourteous. So my first question in cross-examination, after he'd given his evidence quite convincingly, I said, "Officer, are you chewing?" And I expected him to say, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll throw it out." But to my amazement, he said, "No, I'm not." So I paused dramatically and said, "Well, what's in your mouth?" And well, it's medicinal. Okay, so you are chewing something, but it's medicinal. Well, tell us what it is. Well, it was airways. So actually, 2 lies on oath within 15 feet of the magistrates.
Yeah.
So I was able to say, look, this guy in effect can't lie straight in bed. He's taken the oath and he's telling you a complete lie, a complete irrelevance to this case. And the Crown are asking you to say, beyond reasonable doubt, you can be sure he's being honest about these hotly disputed facts. The magistrates obviously agreed and said, no, we can't. Check the case out. So, it's I can tell you hundreds of stories. We haven't got time for it, but I'm just giving you an illustration of it's a whole host of different criteria that help you be a reasonable lawyer.
Yeah, sure. Well, you've reached the very top of your profession in your field. Now, the reason why I got in touch with you is around safety and cyclists and generally kind of 2-wheeled vehicles that are on a cycle lane or on a cycle lane that now is on a pavement, if you see what I mean. So I've got a few clips I was going to play at this point. The first one being, this is from Bournemouth. It's a few days ago, just after the new year. Now, it's basically an e-bike. It's doing more than 25 miles an hour. And the young woman who was knocked over only suffered minor injuries. So I do want to stress that before I play the clip. But here it is.
Okay.
So you can see the light is fast moving. And then there's a collision.
This is on the pavement, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Pavement?
Yes.
It's on the, she's about to cross. She looks like she's about to cross the road.
I believe it's the pavement. In a sense, it's sort of it does matter, but let's just pick. It does matter very much. So I appreciate where they are.
It looks. Can we just play it one more time so I can?
Yeah,
just
I can do that.
Out.
I can do that with pleasure. Just give me 1 second.
It looks like she's about to step off, doesn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't work this out whether it was a pedestrianised area or not.
It almost looks like a floating pavement, doesn't it?
Yes.
A floating bus stop. Sorry.
Yeah.
It looks like that. Look. The first thing that springs to mind is this: in the highway code, in the hierarchy, pedestrians are now number 1 in terms of the most vulnerable.
Sure.
So what that e-biker should have done, having seen her in that proximity, as you would with a car, is immediately slow down, anticipating there is a possibility that she's going to cross. That's what you do in a car. When you see someone getting near the pavement, you're looking, you slow down, you're driving with extra care and attention, anticipating they might make a mistake. They might have earphones on, it's dark at night, there's not a lot of traffic, they might not. You're expecting people, unfortunately, this day and age, to cross without looking. And the point is, if they do, prima facie, it's your fault because you need to be looking out for them. That's what it means by driving or with care and attention.
Let's just take that example and sort of go, well, look, let's not particularly talk about the incident we've seen, but let's think about 25 miles an hour, a couple of lads on an e-bike, and maybe that woman did walk into the road. And maybe that
Yeah,
was a road, but it looked like a pedestrian area to me.
it
But
does. It does.
well, okay, let's go with the pedestrian area. What is the law around it? If they were illegally zooming up
Oh,
there, what's the law around that, and what are the punishments involved for those people?
well, so that's an e-bike, isn't it? We're assuming
Yes,
that's an e-bike, not
yes,
an e-bike. So, I mean, I think we need to make the point, the maximum speed by the electric motor is 15.5 miles an hour. But of course, with pedal power, they can go a lot faster. And unfortunately, what happens is many of these e-bikes lose their e-bike status because they're tweaked and they can go more than that. So it's so as an e-bike, as a if you like a kosher e-bike that only goes 15.5 miles an hour,
mm,
with that electric motor, it's governed by the same laws as cyclists, and those laws are so anachronistic, so woefully inadequate that they're barely worth a mention. Okay,
right. So that is the issue, Nick.
that the problem is there are no relevant laws to cover that situation if that was an e-bike. I mean, the first point is normally cycles and e-bikes, they don't stop. You've got no means of identification. But
Mm,
even if you do, even if you apprehend the cyclist or the rider, you're dealing with laws that just came into place a long time ago when there were very few cycles on the road. Now we're swamped with them, and I'm not wanting in any way to discourage them, but what I want to encourage the government to do to make it safer for all road users is to have laws to make people accountable. So the starting point is identification, and I'm afraid that needs number plates. We need exactly the same laws in place. And I know the cyclists hate this, as mopeds and motorcycles and cars, so that there is a system in place whereby people are accountable for their behavior. And, I would draw an analogy and say, you imagine how people would drive if you took their number plates off their cars.
yeah,
They would drive very
absolutely.
differently. If
Yeah.
you say to someone, the chances are you're not going to get caught, there's no real means of tracking you. Um, you'd like to think as a human being, you want to be
Mm.
careful, wouldn't you? You'd like to think that, but sadly, there are certain people who just don't give a damn.
I
And
drove in a
they're
company
causing
car
carnage.
fleet once. In the late 80s, drove in a had a company car from a car fleet from a bank in London. And I can assure you, even company cars where you would know who was riding them, driving them, they're just driven like madmen.
Yeah, and now the roads have changed massively, haven't we? I mean,
Yeah.
we've got 20-mile-an-hour limits, so you've got cycles and e-bikes and e-scooters undertaking, overtaking. We've got a war on the roads, which needs to be addressed because everyone is now suffering. We've got a highway code that's, in my view, meaningless. Because pedestrians now think, well, we're number one in the hierarchy. We can just literally step out, and that's
Yeah,
removing. We all need to share responsibility.
sure.
So for example, I would say, I mean, I'm just coming slightly off the point. You cannot cross a road if you're on your phone. You cannot cross a road if you're wearing headphones. Pedestrians need to assume responsibility as well. And the problem is saying you can just step off. That's giving them a false sense of security, and it's causing carnage. And when you put into that equation, we've got lots of e-bikes which are very heavy, very
Mm.
fast. You're going to have serious injuries, which, apart from the personal account, the taxpayer is picking up the bill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Why?
the law needs to be addressed. We need law. So just to answer your question, put it into context.
Mm,
If, God forbid, that person was killed, okay, on an e-bike, you're going to look at the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861, wanton and furious cycling. That law was brought into place for people who drove horses and carts to punish the defendant if they were convicted. The maximum sentence is 2 years. And I know we might touch upon this later, but the last government were going to introduce some
yeah.
relevant law for cyclists, if you cycle and cause death, if you cause serious injury, either dangerously or without due care and attention, that currently exists for cars, but it hasn't happened because there was a general election, and I've no idea what this government are going to do about it. And I don't want to be anti-political, but I suspect it's not high on their agenda at the moment.
Sure. So I mean, you've heard nothing. I've Googled round and tried to find where this
Hmm.
government is on the law
Hmm.
that was virtually on the books, wasn't it, as of the
It
election?
was. It was. They talked about it. It was going to happen. Fair enough. I've written, and it's in the Daily Express today, if I can give that, a large article, and I've recommended 12 points, and they've actually printed it. I have contacted the Department of Transport on several occasions over the past few years, because as well as being a defence lawyer, and I know people find this hard, I do want the roads to be safer, and I am constantly making recommendations so that the roads are safer for everybody. And you know, I travel and have done for I don't know how many years, about 50,000 miles a year on the roads, all over Europe. I have a pretty good experience of what needs to happen, as do people who travel massively. And our roads are chaotic; they're in a mess,
Yeah.
and there are lots of things that could simply be done to make the roads safer. But we do need to make everyone responsible. And you know, we're moving towards a green agenda. But how can you have machines that can cause so much danger and say we went in, if you don't stop, we've no idea who it is? How does that make sense? It doesn't.
Well, I want to go back
And
to
then even if we do get you, we haven't got the law in place. The law is redundant and impotent as far as cyclists are concerned. So the government, they need to act on why are they delaying? Why? It's not complicated. It's dead easy to sort out if they get the right people on board.
Well, talking about the impotence of the law, let's come to the case of Kim Briggs. She was 44 years old. She died from catastrophic brain injuries after a 19-year-old cyclist crashed into her in 2016. Now, Charlie Alliston was cleared of manslaughter, sentenced to just 18 months in prison after being done for the only thing the police could do him for, which is that Victorian era law you talk about. I'm just going to play.
Wanton and furious cycling,
I'm just going to play a clip now. This is Kim's husband, Matt Briggs, is campaigning for a change in the law, calling for cyclists to be subject to similar penalties to motorists if they kill or injure anyone on the road. So here he is on This Morning in 2021. That is not the one. Bear with me. No, it's this one.
That's the floating bus stop.
It was a 1832 law causing bodily harm by means of wanton and furious riding. So it doesn't even mention causing death. It carries a maximum penalty of 2 years. And for me, it's not so much about tariff. Tariff is important. You know, if you remove the brakes off a car and did this, you would under the Road Traffic Act, you'd face life imprisonment.
Would you? You'd face life imprisonment?
Up to life imprisonment now under the Road Traffic Act. The thing that I think will surprise viewers is that cycling does not carry anything like the same penalty. There are no laws about causing serious injury or death by illegal or dangerous or careless cycling. There are no laws.
There are no laws. That's amazing, isn't it?
There are no speed limits for cyclists.
Yeah.
There is actually no drink drive limit. There's an offence of cycling whilst unfit, but there's actually no drink drive limit. There's no speed limit. And if you get someone who's caught driving whilst unfit through alcohol, the punishments are just they're financial. They're financial. So
sure.
You know, he's absolutely right. I mean, as we said, the laws need to be put in place, but if they don't include some form of registration, some form of number plate, we're never going to hold people to account. So, and I know it's really unpopular with some cyclists, but we don't have a choice. That's it. It is simple.
Well, it's unpopular with cyclists. I don't think I've come across one, excuse me, that advocates for it anyway, in my many travels around the interwebs and X in particular. But blind people and partially sighted people, the groups, and also other people that I've spoken to on X that have come about from me talking about this subject, the subject of floating bus stops and how dangerous they are for blind and partially sighted people. What's the best way of putting it? I mean, cyclists, do they have the biggest voice? That's probably the best question, because they seem to win all the arguments in all these public bodies.
It's certainly very vociferous. And when Boris Johnson, his right-hand man, was very, very pro-cycling. So, you know, he wanted to promote cycling really, and had no regard for anything else. I think the statistics and the number of injuries that are being occasioned, some of the serious injuries, will force this government, as they did the last government, to actually think, you know, we need to do something now. We can't, if we don't legislate, we've got blood on our hands. And it's as bad as that. I'm not being over dramatic. Mm-hmm. You can't have the sort of carnage that currently exists and not address it. And that's what's happening. And I don't think it would discourage people. I've heard many cyclists say to me, They think it's a really good idea. And there are, you may recall, I think there was a lady crossing the road near Regent's Park towards the end of last year.
That's right.
With a dog. And there was a pool of cyclists who were racing. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
In formation,
they were
as
racing on the
cyclist
road.
time racing. Yeah.
Yeah. And the guy, he hit her. I think she stepped off the pavement. It was an accident. But, if you were a driver and someone steps off the pavement, you're responsible. It's your fault. You've got to be looking for it. And if you're racing, all the more so. Racing is dangerous. So it falls in the category of dangerous driving, dangerous cycling. The offence, that there is an offence of dangerous cycling, but it's a small financial penalty. Well, that isn't a deterrent, isn't it? And this guy wasn't charged. He was charged with nothing. So, and you look at the increase in statistics now, that they are rising exponentially. So it's going to be addressed at some stage. The government is going to have to grapple with it. But the piece of the jigsaw is this identification, because that's the only way you are going to hold people to account. There's no point having the law. For example, if I just move on, if you talk about e-scooters, the law is there. It's there in place. But the missing pieces, and of course they're illegal. But they're classified. There's the speed limits, there's drink drive limits, except dangerous driving. There's the whole plethora of law is there. But without that piece of identification, what does it mean? It's irrelevant, isn't it? And people drive e-scooters. You see them sometimes 70 miles an hour on the roads, overtaking you in a 40 limit. And who is it? Oh yeah, you take a video. What does it show? Someone going very fast. As I say, it's like a car without a number plate, but it's even worse because you even haven't got what sort of e-scooter it is. At least with the car, when you've got it's whatever car it is, what color, etc., etc. You've got a few more details that might help you apprehend somebody.
Sure. I mean, certainly, I see the lads around my town of Blackpool that do very, very high speeds on e-bikes, and they're all dressed in black and they've got masks on, and then they all whiz together at a certain point in town and kind of meet and talk, and then they all whiz off in other directions. I don't know their business, Nick, but I can't imagine it's great for their lives to continue in that business. Let's put it that way.
Well, if you go to Mayfair in London, there's exactly the same phenomena taking place. And I think we know exactly what the type of people who are committing those offences, serious offences, very frightening offences. And, you get a group, 7 or 8, going towards you very, very quickly, surrounding you, seeing what you've got, and then they're off. And they're all masked up, they're all dressed in black. And of course, there are no police on the streets as well, which that's a separate argument, which is something we're probably not going to discuss today.
It's one of the factors, though, around, isn't it, that actually a lot of cyclists and pedestrians say that there isn't enough enforcement. But then how can you enforce against a cyclist with all the CCTV we have? Yeah. You can't enforce because you don't know who the heck they are. So, I'm with you.
That's it. That's the point, isn't it?
But a huge amount of money has been spent on infrastructure. There's a number. I'm just going to do another clip now from Matt Briggs, husband of the late Kim Briggs, who was killed by a cyclist that we just played a clip from before. I just thought this was a really powerful point. Now, he made this last year on This Morning.
When I started this campaign, I was told by the cycling lobby in TV studios like this is not the priority. We need more infrastructure. Well, I can tell you that since Kim's death and up till the end of this year, they will be spending £6 billion on cycling infrastructure. £6 billion. These are the government's own figures. And yet we still have no law that protects people like my wife, people like Gerard's mother. And it's not just us. Peter McCombie, Jim Blackwood, Mary Stone, Elizabeth Walker, I could go on. I was told in 2017 by a government minister who I won't name, we may have to wait for another Kim Briggs. Well, tragedies like what's happened to Gerard's mother keep coming, and yet still no law.
So it's pretty much what you were saying just a little bit earlier, that it's going to take the continuation and the increase of what you call carnage happening at the moment for the government to do anything. Just let's address, because anybody listening to this might think, well, OK, what's the stats on carnage? I'm not asking you to have the stats off the top of your head, but kind of where do you get your views on what this carnage looks like?
Well, from the increase in number of serious accidents.
Right.
I haven't looked at them this morning, so I don't want to speculate.
No,
But
no.
if I said to you that the increase is something like 35 to 40% um, um, since in the last couple of years from the previous 2 years, I'm probably underestimating. If you look at the number of people who are seriously injured, it's a massive number. Thankfully, very few people are killed every year by cyclists and e-bikes and e-scooters, but a huge number are seriously injured. And a huge number of the people who are responsible for that, huge thousands, are not brought to account. And if I just say to you, look, there is a law in place for cyclists. For example, they don't cycle on the pavements. There is a law in place that say that cyclists don't go through red lights. Okay. And I challenge you to go to any city and just sit there for an hour with your video
Sure.
camera and phone on, and you will count hundreds and hundreds of people in that hour committing offences. And what is the point in having a law that is impotent, redundant, wasting everyone's time? Scrap it and say, do your best, do your worst, do whatever you want, because we don't care. Because that would appear to be the truth. And that is something that's completely unpalatable. In a civilized society, how can you not protect the most vulnerable? They are now specifically pedestrians. And obviously, with pedestrians, you've got disabled people, you've got partially sighted people, people who have trouble hearing, and they're extremely vulnerable. That's why they're number one in the hierarchy. They're not being looked after. Giving them that status, in my view, makes their situation more dangerous, not less dangerous. Because
Absolutely.
it gives them a false sense of security, and no one else gives a damn. Except the most responsible people who would in any event give a damn. If you're a car driver and you're going through a narrow street with parked cars on either side, you'd like to think you're going to slow down to a crawl in case a child or a dog or a cat or something runs
course
out
you would.
between the car.
Yeah.
But these people don't. They just go. You see videos after videos on a daily basis with a complete cavalier disregard to their fellow human beings. And the government need to legislate. And that's only that, an infrastructure per se, without any form of accountability, it's not joining the dots up. It's a waste of time. And I have to say, the expenditure on infrastructure is disproportionate. You drive, near where I am, they've spent, I don't know how many £1 million on the most fantastic cycle lane. It's incredible. It's wide, it's safe, it's got a beautiful surface. The cyclists don't use it, they use the roads.
Yeah, no, I've seen that.
It infuriates you. What is it there for?
Yeah, because it might be slightly slower for them. That's kind of the way that they perceive some of these things, is it?
I don't understand it, because there is no adverse impact from there. They're safe, it's fast, there are no potholes, it's incredible, it's straight, they're safe. It's everything they want for.
Yeah. Yeah,
but they don't use it.
They choose to go around the buses in other ways.
So one of my laws would be, if there is a cycle lane, you use it. That's it. And I would be really strong with that. I'd have a penalty point system, disqualification, and all the rest of it. But for minor offences, if you 3 strikes and your bike's confiscated, that's it. Deal with them harshly.
Sure.
We need to encourage people to be legally compliant. That's it. And I know people say, how can you say that with given regard to what you do? I can answer that question. It's not being asked at the moment, but we know how the law works. It's a presumption of innocence, and there would be for these people, and they will be entitled to a defence. But upon conviction, for the 3rd time, let's take the bike off them. There we go.
Yeah, simply said. I've got a bit more footage here now. It relates to what we've just been talking about, really, in terms of the way that there's statistics around cyclists at zebra crossings. And obviously the law, which I discovered this week on zebra crossings, is interesting because cyclists don't actually have to stop. They have to give precedence to the people on the crossing. So cyclists, you can tell that I'm talking to online, understand this. But here's some quite bad footage. It was on the X account of NFB UK, and I'll just play it alongside us here. So this is a floating bus stop somewhere in London. I can't tell you which one it is. And now, I'm sure these are some of the worst examples that have been picked out into this. But I think what you said before is right. If you spend an hour or two at places where cyclists intersect and interact with pedestrians, you'll get this. They just basically, most of them just totally ignore the zebra crossing.
Recording. Yes.
Great stuff. You're back.
There we go. Yeah.
So there's a lot of footage there we've just been looking at. Yeah. What's your thought about these floating bus stops?
The government are obviously trying to share available and limited road space. I think they are extremely dangerous because they don't sufficiently segregate the pedestrian area from the cyclist, the e-scooter and e-bike area. And what happens is you're having cyclists, first of all, who are going very quickly. They're not giving precedence over the zebra crossings. They're not cycling or whatever they're doing with care and attention. They're going far too fast. So there needs to be a speed limit. It needs to be a very slow speed limit. They've done it on the cheap, haven't they? So what happens is if there's someone crossing, for example, a zebra crossing, despite the fact that the highway code says that they have priority, in my view, as a cyclist, you should stop. In my view, if you don't stop, you're not cycling with due care and attention. As I say, that's the offence. It's redundant. What they do is they swerve onto the pavement and go round, risking other pedestrians.
Yeah, so, I've got clips and clips of I've clips of three-wheel cargo vehicles doing that.
Yeah. The only people who are allowed to drive on the pavements legally are disabled scooters. They're the only ones that I'm aware of. Obviously, ladies pushing prams or men pushing prams or whatever. But the only motorised or electric vehicle is a disabled vehicle. So these they give the cyclists a priority, a green light to go quickly, far too quickly, and then they use the pavement because there's no curb for them to go over, so they're going to continue with their route, and there's no accountability, no responsibility, and no enforcement. And so that's one of the reasons why there's increased carnage. I'm not suggesting they're deliberately trying to mow down pedestrians. I'm not saying that. I said, but the infrastructure actually encourages it to happen, it's just ill-conceived. Who thought that this was a sensible idea? It's madness. If you say, as they do in many European countries, we are going to have a floating bus stop, and I hate using that expression because it's a total misnomer.
Yeah, me too.
Stick some really high pavement on either side so that they are confined to that area, and then fair enough, it works. And have some strict rules about zebra crossings so everyone understands exactly what's going to happen and how they're going to work. And also, as I said before, make pedestrians responsible. I don't hear anyone at any stage saying, pedestrians, you need to pay attention as well. You cannot carte blanche wander around with your headphones on, not looking where you're going, and not expect something adverse to happen to you. You need to assume responsibility. They're not prepared to, and I'm afraid, and I know this sounds ridiculous, we do need to legislate for crossing a road or using a pedestrian crossing on the phone or with headphones on, because it's dangerous. And we all need to participate to make our roads safer.
Thank you very much for talking to me.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
Too many elephants.
A huge thank you to Mr. Loophole, aka Nick Freeman, for his knowledge and insight into the issues I've been talking about since the very beginning of Too Many Elephants. You can find him on X. He is at the Mr. Loophole, on X. So the laws of the road are there to discourage poor behaviour and thrust accountability on those who drive and cycle irresponsibly. But the law must be a good one. The police must investigate professionally. The Crown Prosecution Service must prosecute professionally too. Also, the law itself, as written by Parliament, must do the job it was designed to do, not just on paper, but in real life. This is where Mr. Loophole comes in. He's a criminal lawyer that represents clients across a range of criminality. It's his job to find ways within the law to ensure his clients don't do porridge. But if a law has loopholes or is not doing what it was designed to do, then it's up to Parliament to change that law. Nick Freeman has a ton of ideas about how we can make our streets and shared spaces safer for everyone, including changes in the law for pedestrians, cyclists and car drivers. Mainly, it's about taking more responsibility for your own safety and that of others. I'll be going into more details on his recommendations on next week's Talking to X on Too Many Elephants. So after 22 years working for the BBC, I continue to do public service journalism, but now without the licence fee. So please do subscribe for free to my Substack at toomanyelephants.com. Too Many Elephants is in its early stages, but my themes are simple and clear: to help people and businesses tell their story better, to uphold time-honoured journalistic principles, and to cover important stories that help you to understand the world better. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean McGinty. This has been Talking to X on Too Many Elephants.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.